Hello and welcome once again to this wonderful offering by nailib.com. Today we are dealing with History SL, and within History SL we are talking about paper 1 and how that paper is usually structured. There'll be another video which will detail about exactly which questions come in paper 1 and how to tackle each question. But because we are starting or about to start with the prescribed subject under paper 1, I thought it's a good idea just to think about what is it that IB expects us in terms of assessment. So even before we deal with each question individually, which is probably something we should be doing at the end of the syllabus after we've covered all the topics and after we've done with all the thematic ideas and unities, it's a good idea from the word go to have some sort of an understanding as to what is expected out of us in terms of assessment. Keeping that in mind, I thought, and we would spend this particular video just looking at A, the IBSL assessment in its entirety, and B, paper 1, specifically what skills you should possess as a learner, probably even as a faculty member, because you'll be delivering the syllabus to a range of learners with range of different abilities to learn and inculcate within their final written papers. So in terms of paper 1, what are the skills that you're expected to have? So this is more of a general overview of that paper 1 assessment. There'll be another video much later in the syllabus which will be dealing with exactly which questions come in paper 1 and are expected to be a part of paper 1. So if you look at the overall ideas and charts within the IB assessment, paper 1 for an SL student, ideally the listener of this video, it has up to 30% of the weightage of your overall grade. So overall, out of the 100% of your grade, 30% comes directly from paper 1. If you are an HL student, then this particular component of paper 1, the source-based paper, will fetch you 20% of your grade. So it goes down because you have an extra HL extension component as well. But if you're an SL student, paper 1 stands at 30%. If you're an HL student, paper 1 stands at 20% of your grade. Now, if you look at the grade descriptor, that does not change regardless of the paper, regardless of the component. So whether it be paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, that does not have any changes at all as far as these key components and these key ideas are concerned. So for reaching the sweet 7 that Nail IB of course is absolutely committed to for you to get in your final transcript, the grade 7 descriptor remains as demonstrates conceptual awareness, insight and knowledge and understanding which are evident in the skills of critical thinking, a high level of ability to provide answers which are fully developed, structured in a logical and coherent manner, and illustrated with appropriate examples. So you must pepper all your long answers, even your paper 1 answers, which are source-based answers, with appropriate examples. And a precise use of terminology which is specific to the subject. So in context, it should not be something that is just spoken randomly or written randomly. Familiarity with the literature of the subject. So in some senses, what we in history we call historiography. Again, I encourage you to look at our HL videos for a huge lengthy discussion on what is historiography and how to cite historiography for your HL answers, essay-like answers, which you can again utilize for paper 2 as well. The ability to analyze and evaluate evidence and to synthesize knowledge and concepts. Awareness of alternative points of view and subjective and ideological biases and the ability to come to reasonable, albeit although tentative conclusions. So you are not expected to have a final conclusion. That's the beauty of a history paper. In fact, of all humanities papers that the IB deals with, they don't give you the final answer. As long as you can defend your point of view, as long as you can showcase your point of view, the IB is very happy to grade you for that. So just keep that in mind as you write your answers. You're not supposed to produce the perfect, brilliant answer. All you're expected to do is absolutely and correctly and theoretically and obviously synthetically, I mean in a synthesis manner, do make sure to justify your opinion and justify your conclusion. There should be ample evidence within your answer, the way it is explored, to justify the conclusion that you're giving. If that is done, that's more than what IB expects out of you at this age and stage of your life. So the conclusions can be tentative and that's welcome as well. Consistent evidence of critical and reflective thinking should be available to your examiner and a high level of proficiency in analyzing and evaluating data or problem solving. So this is the descriptor for 7. As you can see, as far as data or problem solving is concerned, that means this kind of a descriptor will also apply to a subject like economics, because that's the overall kind of an understanding, might apply to economics as well. Though for IB history also, many a times you will require certain amount of data or certain kind of data through which you can answer your questions. So just keep that in mind, that the problem solving approach is something that should be very obvious to you and very natural to you. With that, let's quickly move on to the idea of command terms. Please understand, every question has a command term. Essentially, what you are doing when you are writing a response to a particular question comes directly from the command term of that question. What do I mean by a command term? Command term is simply the operative word in the phrasing of the question. If you fail to address the operative word in the question, then regardless of how brilliant your answer is in terms of evidence, in terms of examples, in terms of quotations, in terms of all sorts of historiographical angles and aspects, it will fetch very few marks. It will be graded perhaps a bit too critically, simply because you're not addressing the command term, which is the operative term in your discussion. There is, of course, a list of command terms that's available to us, and we are very lucky and fortunate in the sense that IB very often uses this list of command terms. So, in most cases, in most usual cases, this would be the bunch of command terms that you will be assessed on as far as IB history is concerned. So, let's have a quick look at those command terms, and let's also look at their definitions. So, the first command term, in terms of, I think this is given exactly alphabetically as a list. So in terms of alphabetical understanding of command terms, the first command term is, of course, analyze. So what is analysis? So quick definition of analysis as given here is the breakdown in order to bring out the essential elements or structure. So when you break down something to showcase in your words what is the essential element or structure of something, that is called analysis. Basically, in my own simpler words, it's your voice. What you think about a topic. How you would come up with your final interpretation. That is analysis. Analysis is you taking into account all the evidence that's available and bringing it down to the bare bones of your own overarching final conclusive statement. That is analysis. Moving on, the second command term is compare. So in this case, compare always and only means similarities. Alright. So give an account of the similarities between two or more items or situations, referring to both or all of them. So when I say referring to both or all of them, it simply means that your similarities should be running commentary. In other words, it cannot be like in middle school we used to have these tabular kind of a distinction. That is not acceptable. Neither acceptable nor expected out of you as a scholar doing IB history. Alright, so the commentary has to be running, which means when you are comparing two different things, make sure you comment on their similarities, but make sure that you refer to both of them and not only to one of them as an example and then say the other one also has it. That's not how you do it. You identify a common theme and you make sure that both the similarities that you've identified, comparisons that you've identified, speak to that theme, and that is then how you manage it and go on with it. The third command term is compare and contrast. So in certain questions, you might be asked to do both compare and contrast, and no points for guessing at all. If compare is similarities, contrast of course is differences. So on the one hand, you will look at similarities, on the other hand, you will look at differences. So give an account of similarities and differences between two or more items or situations. Again, referring to both of them throughout. What does that mean, referring to both of them throughout? In simpler words, a running commentary is required. You need to be aware of the entire thing as if you are dealing with it one after the other. You cannot deal with it in two separate thinking boxes. The fourth command term is contrast. So compare and contrast and contrast. So just like compare is only similarities, contrast is only differences. I'm not going to dwell on it further because I'll just be repetitive then. The fifth command term is discuss. Discuss simply is to offer a considered and balanced review. Review is a very simple word. It simply means to look at something again. Review. So as you are viewing the entire situation, you lay it out in a certain structured order. That is discuss. Alright. So offer a considered and balanced review that includes a range of arguments, a range of factors or hypotheses. Opinions or conclusions should be presented clearly and supported by appropriate evidence. That is discussion, where you present all of the data in a balanced manner with wonderful hypotheses, with wonderful opinions, with wonderful conclusions, etc. All of them backed and all of them justified properly. It's a higher order skill. Discuss is very different from merely description. Description is just to write down everything together. That's not discussion. Discussion is to bring an inherent structure which you as the writer are aware of. You are positing an argument, you are positing a structure when you are discussing something. When you are describing something, you are merely using your faculties to just repeat something in a particular order. Whereas discussion requires a certain kind of inherent structure as you are balancing it out and as you are leveling it for certain kind of answering and for certain kind of posturing. A slightly higher skill is next on our list, which is evaluate. Evaluate, simply ascribing value to something. Just like review is to review something, once again view something. Similarly, evaluate is to again value something. So giving something a value. So in the words of the text, it's make an appraisal by weighing the strengths and limitations. That is value, how something is strong enough or is something weak. So that gives us the idea of evaluate. All right. So the strength of something, the weakness of something, if you're looking at both, you are evaluating it. Once again, do remember it, especially under exam conditions, it will be very easy for you to quickly run away with the strengths of something or quickly run away with the weakness of something, because that will be very obvious. That is not evaluation. You will not be graded fully. If you only look at the strength of something and leave it at that, your evaluation is partial or incomplete. Similarly, if you look at the weakness of something and leave it at that, your evaluation is partial or incomplete. So it's very important to evaluate something in its fullest form, giving both the weakness side of it and the strength side of it. The next command term for us is examine. Examine simply means consider an argument or concept in a way that uncovers the assumptions and the interrelationships of the issue. So again, different from description. You're not merely describing, you are examining, you are scratching the surface to see whether there are interrelationships that exist. Similarly, you are scratching to the surface to see whether there are assumptions which lie behind a certain kind of statement, a certain kind of view, a certain kind of positionality. So if you do that, that is the command term of examine. Once again, you will be expected to present informed and intelligent opinions as a part of justifying your examination. All right, your hypothesis should be absolutely sound and strong if you are examining something, but go beyond description. That's my again and again my push, both for the key command term of discuss and for this command term of examine as well. Don't get confused that this merely means description. And finally, perhaps one of the toughest command terms to think of, because it offers a range of analysis, and especially when you are thinking of writing a full-fledged answer, this command term is the one that requires the most amount of effort, which is to what extent. Considers the merit or otherwise of an argument, so merit or lack of it, of an argument or concept. Opinions and conclusions should be presented clearly and supported with appropriate evidence and sound argument. This is the one that has to present a range of views, because you have to show both your agreement and disagreement. You have to show both whether the argument is sound or unsound. And if it is sound, on what justifications are you calling it sound? If it is unsound, on what justifications are you calling it unsound? So in that sense, this command term requires you to have a range of information, requires you to have a range of thoughts, ideas, opinions and hypotheses to offer. Once again, all of them justified. with the help of historical examples, with the help of historical or historians' historiography, and so on and so forth. So, to what extent is an important command term as well? Now, moving on from there, if you just bear with me for a second, in terms of suggestions, this text also offers us some of the do's and don'ts. I will not waste your time with the don'ts because I think those are much more natural to a scholar of your range. But I would spend some time to encourage you to do the following suggestions as far as this text is concerned. It says that use the 5 minutes. So IB gives you 5 minutes of reading time, quite unlike any other board. So while the other boards expect you to directly jump into the writing of the responses immediately, IB does give you 5 minutes. By the way, you're not supposed to write during those 5 minutes. So you can't touch your pencils or pens during those 5 minutes. You're just supposed to be reading during those 5 minutes. That's the reading, literally the reading time. So use the 5 minutes that have been given to you as reading time to organize your thoughts. Take a few minutes to plan your response on a scrap paper. Highlight this or encourage you to do this more than what is already written here. Make sure you plan your answer. I've seen some of the best students of mine planning the answers, and that is very clearly reflected sometimes as a teacher, because these are subjects which usually have either they have very big batches or they have very small batches. So I was very fortunate that I had small enough manageable batches where I could give that kind of focus to every child. And I was very happy to see that some of the scrap papers that students had just cut out, they showed immaculate, impeccable planning, which was automatically reflected in the very high grade that I gave to the student. So it's very important to have that kind of an absolute clear sense of what is that planning, but don't forget to cross out that planning as well once you're done with it. All right. So make sure that you're also able to cross out and it's very clearly a scrap piece of paper so that you're not downgraded because of that. Of course, you'll never be downgraded for the presence of such a paper, but in case you're worried, just make sure that you scratch it out. Keep track of the time that you have left. Highlight, underline, and briefly annotate the exam paper to highlight important terms. So you are allowed to write on your own question paper. Write legibly. I cannot underscore this a lot, that as an examiner, that's the greatest fear that we have, that of seeing a script that is not readable to us. So make sure that you write in a legible form for us. Clearly indicate which question you are answering in the border. Write in blue or black ink. Review your response before you hand your answers in to quickly check for careless mistakes. Cross out material you do not want marked, such as planning, and bring your response back to the thesis/question in a brief conclusion. So that's again answering the command term. That is, that the importance of that can hardly be more underscored or like excessively underscored. That is something that you're there to do. So make sure that you are doing that with absolute clarity, with absolute understanding. Moving on from there, let's just quickly then spend some time now, the remaining time of this video now, to look at paper 1 in some amount of detail so that we know the expected skills that we are supposed to possess as we continue with the paper 1 core content in the coming videos. So paper 1 overview. Now that we have discussed what assessment looks like for IB history, let us examine this paper more closely. The structure of paper 1 is designed to test the use of the skills of a historian by asking you questions based on 4 brief sources. So it will be a booklet of 4 brief sources relating to one of the case studies of your prescribed subject. So nobody can predict whether Japan will come or Germany/Italy will come. Nobody can predict that. Okay. So you have to prepare both the case studies, and any one of them will be tested in terms of along with 4 sources. The sources, of course, can take several forms. We'll just look at them in a minute. They can be from a range of written sources, books, periodicals, diaries, or speeches. They can also be editorial cartoons or photographs, maps, graphs, or even charts. So be prepared, like a good historian, be prepared to utilize a source in order to actually give yourself the best kind of a response in terms of whatever the command term is. The structure of paper 1, and that is the beauty of it. While the case study is unknown to us as a responder, we are lucky that the 4 questions never change. In other words, the command term and the expectation of the question paper is known to you from day 1 of your grade 11. That these are the 4 questions you're going to tackle. Material will change, source will change, but you can train yourself for the skill that's required for this. And that's why we here at Nail IB are here, in order to support you, to train you with that skill. We'll be doing a lot of sources as we continue our conversation on the move to global war, so that 4 of these skills get honed for you by the time you sit for your final exam. So the first question is always a two-part question. That's question 1A, question 1B, which will ask for an understanding of terms, ideas, or contents in the source. So there'll be certain details in the source, and you will be expected to elaborate and showcase your knowledge and understanding of certain things from within the source. They could be terms, they could be ideas, they could be content, or they could be any of these aspects of the source. The second question will always be a question asking you to analyze the value and limitations. Evaluate, remember, value and limitations of one of the sources according to its origin, purpose, and content. This is the most popular kind of a question. In fact, if you've done your IGCSE history, you're already aware of the OPVL. So the origin, purpose, value, and limitation, and all of that based on content. So sometimes in some other perhaps geographical regions, they also call it OPCVL. So origin, purpose, content, value, and limitation as well. But the second question is basically dealing with that. The third question is a question asking you to compare and contrast elements of two of the sources and what this reveals about a particular issue. Once again, this helps you, the framing of the question helps you to do a running commentary. You have to compare and contrast, but not in a schematic middle school manner. You're supposed to have a running commentary. And what will be that running commentary based on? Where shall it anchor itself? It shall anchor itself in the question asked to you. So you will be asked to compare and contrast, but on the basis of the question that has been posed to you or posited to you. Mind you, the question very clearly states compare and contrast. So please be prepared to write an answer which deals with similarities and differences. Finally, the fourth question will be a question which will ask you to evaluate a position given in the question based on the sources and your own knowledge of the case study of the prescribed subject. So sources and your own knowledge. So you have to absolutely keep in mind that the sources will help you, but only to a certain extent. You're also supposed to give context with the help of your own knowledge as far as the fourth question of paper 1 is concerned. The order of the questions, and this is the justification for it, reflects the steps that historians move through when investigating historical events using sources. Historians must first ensure that they understand what the source shows or demonstrates. Then they also, only once they understand all the terms, the concepts, the ideas that are there in the source, can they go on to look at its value and potential limitations, which is the second question. And only from there can they then compare it in their own minds with other sources that they have already seen or that they have already experienced. So that's the question where they are looking at the comparison and contrast. And finally, once this is complete, historians combine the information from the sources with what they already know about the topic under their investigation to develop new understanding of the event, which is question 4. So that kind of a final evaluation is what presents itself as question 4. While we have already discussed the command terms which are essential, likewise not all questions will be equally difficult or equally easy, but do remember that remembering, in other words describing what you remember also to a certain extent, that's the lowest skill level. Okay, just writing your answer and just pattering out information in that sense will perhaps not fetch you the highest grade, whereas creating, evaluating, analyzing, these are the highest skills that you can have as a student. So just focus on those skills. The more you can analyze, the more you can present your own opinion, the more you can evaluate something for its strength and its weakness. Of course, in the first question, that's not expected out of you. So don't go around wasting your time by evaluating and showing excessive skills in the first question itself. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that as the questions go on, as the higher order question comes up, similarly, your skill set that you're demonstrating should also change. That's what I mean, that that as you go up, while remembering, understanding, explaining things is the very first question. The final question in terms of analysis and evaluation is where your key skill should lie. And in terms of grading, the first two questions are 3 and 2 marks, so that's 5 marks. The second question is for 4 marks, the OPBL question. The compare and contrast question is for 6 marks. And finally, the fourth question in terms of evaluation, etc., is for 9 marks. So that's a total of 24 marks, if my math is correct, which usually it is not, but that's perfectly all right. I am not teaching you IB mathematics, and you should be very grateful to God for that. But anyway, let's move on from there, and let's very quickly then look at some of the key terms that we have already discussed. And these are the terms that we will keep revisiting for paper 1. So that's why you should have a list of these terms. They are different from the command terms, which are a part of the question. These key terms, you should be absolutely, they should be on your fingertips as you deal with paper 1. So that's why it was important to do them beforehand. So the first key term, of course, that you need to know is the term origin. Alright, another fancy term for it in terms of an alternative is the word provenance. Alright, so when referring to a source, the origin is when, where, and by whom was the source created. Now, if you can tear apart these three terms, when, where, and by whom, obviously you can come up with so many different ideas in terms of value, limitation, purpose, and so on and so forth. So while provenance seems like a very simple kind of a thing to locate, especially in the IB and even in the IGCSE, because it's given right below the source very often. It's mentioned in terms of the provenance. The ability to utilize that information to enrich your answer is something that will really take you forward, both in terms of IB history and even later on in your life if you aim to pursue this subject. So when referring to a source, the origin is when, where, and by whom was the source created. Purpose. This describes the reason that the source was created. In other words, was the source designed to persuade somebody? Was it designed to be an honest account? Was it created to justify a position? Or all of these understanding the intended audience for a source can help you to determine the purpose. So for example, so many a times a cartoonist's purpose is to be satirical about a certain event in which they're not very happy with it, and then they end up commenting upon and thinking about ideas of a separate kind. So what is the intended kind of an impact that the cartoonist has in terms of their own purpose that they are intending for the cartoon? Does that impact always actually have that kind of a role that they had thought when they were making the cartoon? That's another way in which a purpose of a cartoon can be interpreted. Moving on from there, you have the idea of content. So simply put, the content of a source is a description of what it says or depicts. In the context of the second question on paper 1, you will need to discuss how this content helps or does not help the historian. So basically the purpose and the utility, in other words. So purpose is already something you've described. So when it comes to content, you must comment on the utility of a certain source and whether or not it helps the historian to understand a certain issue. Moving on from there, simply describing the content will of course receive no marks because, as I said, description is the least, remembrance is the least level of in terms of your actual grading system. So just describing what you can see in the cartoon or what you can see in the source is of course not good enough. The fourth key skill or the fourth key term that you must know in order to understand the paper is the question of value. So in terms of paper 1, the value of a source refers to why the source is important. So value is simply the importance or the value that that source brings to us or useful to a historian studying the subject of the source. So value has only this meaning as far as paper 1 is concerned. It can have multiple other meanings. For as far as paper 1 is concerned, only this meaning is useful. Limitations, again, when describing or determining the limitations of a source, you are looking for factors in or about the source that would hinder the historian from getting a complete view of the event being studied. So once again, limitation can have multiple meanings, but as far as paper 1 is concerned, limitations merely refers to the fact of what the historian cannot see or what the historian cannot have access to because of the things which are missing in the source. So sometimes the source might be missing in terms of a different perspective, or might have inherently been very biased, especially if it's a source that is perhaps a public rally speech. Then, of course, it has that kind of an intention to have that impact on a certain number of people who are hearing it. So, it may not be the most honest kind of a recommendation. So, that is why the limitation is also something that is very important to understand and of course, comment on, especially for question 2. Compare and contrast, which is our third question, to give an account of the similarities and differences between two or more items or situations, again referring to all of them throughout. So that's a running commentary that's expected out of you. Please don't think of it in a schematic manner, A and then followed by B. That is something very important in terms of compare and contrast. With reference to, so that is also something that's very important. So making and depict a direct or an explicit link to your answer to the components listed in your question. For example, in the second question of paper 1, linking your response directly to the OPC, that is the origin, purpose and content, is something that is also very important. So you must write this kind of a line in all your answers and your responses. You must refer to the sources whose content, purpose and whose content, value and limitation you're commenting on. So that kind of a clear referencing is necessary. That clear linking is something that you should be really looking forward to. Examine is also a command term in terms of a full paper as well, like paper 2 as well, an essay like question as well. But in terms of paper 1, examine is just to consider an argument or concept in a way that uncovers the assumptions and interrelationships of the issue. So the definition doesn't change, but of course you'll be applying it at a way lesser level in paper 1, given the kind of a gamut of other skills that are already being tested. You cannot expect to examine situations. In fact, the IB also will not give you such a long question for paper 1 as it will for paper 2. So examining here will be very limited. The skill will not change, but the scale at which the skill is being applied will change. So that is something that you'll have to keep in mind. Discuss again to offer a considered and balanced review that includes a range of arguments, factors, or hypotheses. We've just discussed this minutes ago. Opinions or conclusions should be presented clearly and supported by appropriate evidence. So that is also something that you should be very clear about. When you're discussing something, you must present your response in a very structured manner such that it clearly brings out the opinions, hypotheses, etc. as well. And finally, of course, the analyze part, the analysis part, to break down in order to bring out the essential elements or structure and explain how these elements etc. relate to each other. So that is also something that is very important, wherein you look at and wherein you think about all these questions in detail, in great detail, as you are analyzing them. So with that, all the key skills and key command terms that you've been discussing, that we have been discussing, they have been finished. You need to have these words at the back of your mind when you are attempting paper 1. It's very, very important because these words will be peppered throughout your answer, or these skills should be at the back of your mind when you're attempting your paper, because these are ideas that will really drive your paper 1. And it's a full 30% of your grade if you're an SL student, and 20% of your grade if you're an HL student. And apart from the IB, even source reading as an idea is also very important for a historian. So you should be able to do this kind of a skill even if you're not interested. Of course you are interested in IB history, HLSL, but even if you were not interested, these are very important skills for you to have even as a thinker. Think about your own role as a 21st century citizen. Everything around you, all the media around you that you consume is a source. So utilizing these sources or utilizing these skills to apply in all aspects and all domains of your life might be actually quite useful as well. Of course, the final idea we here at Nail IB are absolutely committed to is that Sweet 7 in history and in all the other subjects. Keeping that in mind, I strongly encourage you to think about this video, think about the key skills, and of course, in the very next video, we'll straight away jump directly into the content of our prescribed subject of the move to global war, where we'll be looking at the Japanese expansionism into China between 1931 and 41, and even elsewhere, but mainly into China. And with that, we'll start our discussion on paper 1 history SL. I'm really looking forward to starting this course with you, and I hope you're as excited as I am to pursue this particular portion with us here at nailib.com. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you so much for your time.